The day my wife and son were killed, my brother was 45 minutes down the road popping champagne at a housewarming party. I need you to sit with that for a second before I keep going, because I've told this story a few times now, and every time I say that line out loud, someone shakes their head like they misheard me. They didn't. Henry had been up since 6 that morning. His school play was that afternoon, 3rd grade, something about the American Southwest, and he'd been cast as a cactus. He'd practiced his one line at the dinner table every night for 2 weeks, arms spread wide, chin up, voice as grave as a 6-year-old can make it. I have been standing here for 200 years. Then he'd hold the pose until we clapped, and his whole face would collapse into a grin, every single night. Same routine. I never got tired of it. Laurel made her coffee the same way every morning. 2 sugars, stirred 5 times, always counterclockwise. I'd asked her about the counterclockwise thing once, and she'd thought about it genuinely and then said, "That's just how it works." I never got a better answer, and I stopped looking for one. She packed his lunch in his space-themed thermos. She tucked a folded note into his jacket pocket the way she always did. Something small and silly, a drawing or a joke, something for him to find when we weren't there. He left his baseball cap on the kitchen counter, always backward, always slightly too large, the Velcro adjustment half undone. I set it on top of his backpack before I walked out the door so he wouldn't forget it. I didn't go to the play. I had a client call I couldn't reschedule. I told Laurel I'd catch the next one. Before I go further, if you're here with me, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're from. Knowing someone is listening makes more difference than I can explain. And if stories like this touch you, please consider subscribing. It helps this reach the people who need it most. My name is Gideon Hale, and this is the story of how the people I came from showed me exactly who they were, and how my wife made sure they couldn't take anything from me even after she was gone. The call came at 4:22 in the afternoon, a number I didn't recognize. A highway patrol officer with a flat, practiced voice. The kind of tone that gets trained into people who deliver tragedy for a living. There had been a collision at the intersection of Route 74 and Sulphur Springs Road, just outside of Swannanoa. A refrigerated freight truck belonging to Coldwell Distribution had run a red light. My wife and son had been in the left lane, coming home from the school play. They were both pronounced at the scene. I don't remember sitting down. I remember being on the floor of my office, back against the desk, phone in my hand, staring at the carpet. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't unlock the screen again. I sat there for what might have been 2 minutes or 20. Eventually, I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. I said the words. She began to cry immediately, the deep kind, the kind that comes from somewhere low in the chest. And then, only a few seconds in, I heard my brother's voice in the background, not clearly, just enough to know he was there. And my mother's crying changed. It went quieter, more controlled. "Wyatt says the timing is very difficult," she said. "He just closed on the house this morning. The party started an hour ago. All his friends are already there." I looked out my office window. The parking lot was completely ordinary. A woman was unloading grocery bags from her trunk. A kid on a bike was cutting diagonally across the lot the way kids always do, like geometry is optional. The sky was still blue. The world had not paused even slightly. "He'll come first thing tomorrow," my mother said. "He just needs to know you'll be all right tonight." "I'll be fine," I said. I hung up. I didn't say anything else because there was nothing else to say to that. Laurel's parents drove from Knoxville without stopping, 14 hours straight. Her mother arrived still wearing the blazer she'd had on at work, her eyes swollen nearly shut, her hair unwashed. Her father came to the door and took my hand and held it for a long time without saying anything. These were people I'd met 12 times in 8 years of marriage. They stood in my living room that night like they belonged there in a way that my own family never had. The funeral service was on a Thursday. White lilies. I'd put Henry's drawing of a cactus, arms wide, drawn in green crayon, on the front of the program because his teacher had sent it over, and I couldn't bring myself to say no to that. The priest spoke with real care. Laurel's college roommate gave a reading. The choir sang something from the hymnal that Laurel had loved since she was a girl. I'd reserved a pew on the right side for my family, 3 rows back, where they'd have a clear view. I'd folded name cards and set them on the cushions myself the night before, in the quiet of the church, while a janitor mopped the far aisle. My mother's name, my father's, my brother and his wife. The cards were still on the cushions when the recessional ended. I sat in the church parking lot afterward in my car, not moving, not knowing where to go. Home felt impossible. A hotel felt worse. I picked up my phone out of the same reflex I'd had for years. Always checking, always the same rotation of apps. And the first thing that came up was my brother's profile. He had posted 43 photos. There he was in his new backyard, beer raised, arm around his wife, grinning into the camera, the new kitchen, the new deck, the fire pit strung with Edison bulbs. Friends I recognized and some I didn't, everyone laughing. The last our photo was timestamped 3:11 p.m. The service had started at 3. I put the phone in my glove compartment, drove to a gas station on the far side of town, and sat in the parking lot until it was dark enough to go home. Henry's baseball cap was still on top of his backpack by the door. I left it there. I couldn't move it, and I couldn't explain why, and I didn't try. The house was full of sounds at night that I'd never noticed before. The refrigerator cycling, the heat running, the faint creak of the second-floor hallway. Sounds that had always existed underneath the sound of a family living in a house. Now there was nothing above them. I learned to sleep with the television on low. It helped a little. About 3 weeks after the accident, an attorney named Mr. Kellner reached out to me. He specialized in commercial vehicle liability, and what he had to say was straightforward. The Coldwell distribution driver had 2 prior DUI convictions on his record. His commercial license had been reinstated under a conditional agreement that explicitly prohibited him from operating freight vehicles. Coldwell had hired him without running a current background check. That failure, Mr. Kellner explained, created clear grounds for a wrongful death claim. In cases with this level of documented negligence, he said, settlement is almost inevitable. He was right. 5 months later, Coldwell Distribution settled. The number was meaningful. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have anyone to tell. What I didn't know yet was that Laurel had already been several steps ahead of this. My mother called 2 days after a brief item ran in the local paper, just a mention that the family had reached a resolution with Coldwell Distribution, no figures given. She called in the morning before I'd had coffee. "We've been thinking," she said. That word "we" again, the way she'd been using it lately. Wyatt and Bryn are stretched thin. First year in the new house, unexpected costs, you know how it goes. You have more than enough now. Family helps family through hard times. "Mom," I said, "Laurel and Henry are dead." "I know that. I know, sweetheart. But life does have to continue, and the people who love you need to know you're thinking about them too." I waited a beat. "Which Thursday were you on the road to Swannanoa?" Silence. "I mean the Thursday I buried my wife and my son." She exhaled. "That's not fair." "I'll let you decide what's fair," I said, and I hung up. That evening my brother came to the house without calling. He was dressed like he was going to a lunch meeting. Pressed shirt, clean shoes. He had the practiced smile of someone who'd rehearsed the conversation in the car on the way over. I let him in, some reflex of years, some muscle memory of being brothers. He walked into the living room and looked around with the particular slowness of someone who is appraising and trying not to look like they're appraising. His gaze moved across the shelves, the furniture, the photograph on the mantel, Laurel and Henry at the Carolina coast. Henry's cap blown sideways by the wind, Laurel's head tipped back laughing at something just off frame. He sat down without being invited to. "You're my brother," he started. "That's the foundation. You're my brother and I love you, and I've watched you go through the worst thing a person can go through, and I'm worried about you. Settlement money changes people. It changes decisions. You're not in a position right now to think clearly about the long term. That's not a criticism, that's grief. That's human. But without family around you, people make choices they regret." "You weren't at the funeral," I said. "That was one day. You posted 43 photos. He stopped. "I need you to leave," I said. He stood up, and before he reached the front door, he took out his phone and turned slowly around the room, letting the camera sweep across the furniture and the walls and the mantel. Deliberately, openly, like a man doing an inventory he doesn't expect to be questioned on. I watched him do it. Neither of us said anything. He left. His car was gone from the driveway before I'd closed the door. My mother called a week later to invite me to what she called a family conversation at her house. Her voice on the phone had the careful warmth of someone reading from a prepared script. I drove out there. Even then, even knowing what I knew, I went. I think I needed to see it all the way through. I think part of me still wanted to be wrong about what they were. The living room was full. Aunts I hadn't spoken in 3 years. My father quiet in his usual chair. My brother and his wife on the couch, their hands folded, their expressions arranged into something that was meant to look like concern. And sitting in the armchair across from them was a man I'd never seen before, holding a leather notepad with a pen already uncapped. My mother introduced him as a specialist in family financial planning. "This is about the settlement," I said. "We're worried about you," my brother said from the couch. "You've been isolating, not answering calls." "I answer calls from people who came to the funeral." His jaw moved. The man with the notepad began talking. He used phrases like unified family stewardship and managed oversight in grief situations. He said that financial decisions made in periods of acute loss were statistically prone to long-term regret. He said the word family 4 times in 90 seconds. My mother leaned forward. "If you walk out of here without letting us help you, we may have no choice but to seek a legal arrangement. For your own protection." I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. "Do what you need to do," I said. I drove home. I made coffee. I stirred it the wrong direction and didn't notice until I'd already taken the first sip. 2 days later, an email arrived from a law firm I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Estate Planning, Laurel Hale, Confidential." Miss Fairweather's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind of building that smells like old wood and temperature control. She stood when I walked in and shook my hand with the steadiness of someone who is used to sitting with people in very hard moments and not looking away from them. "Your wife first came to see me 4 years ago," she said, after we sat down. "Right after Henry started kindergarten. She told me she wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened to her, you'd be protected. Not just financially." She was very specific about the kind of protection she meant. She set a folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were 3 documents with different company letterheads, a life insurance policy, a structured protective trust, and a set of clauses she called the ethical provisions. The language was precise. Any individual who failed to provide direct personal presence or documented contact within 72 hours of a qualifying loss event, defined in the accompanying exhibit as the death of a spouse or child, would be permanently barred from any claim against the estate, the trust, or any assets derived from either. She anticipated several scenarios, Miss Fairweather said. She prepared for all of them. At the bottom of the folder was a sealed envelope, my name in Laurel's handwriting on the front. Miss Fairweather gave me the room. The letter was 2 pages, front and back. Practical first, an account number, the name of her financial advisor, a note about a savings account she'd opened in Henry's name when he was 3 that I hadn't known about, and that one made me have to put the letter down for a while and just breathe. Then near the end, "If your brother ever comes for what isn't his, he'll find I already answered that door. You don't have to fight anyone, I already did. Use what's left to build something worth building. Don't spend your life surviving what they did. Spend it proving it didn't finish you." I sat in that office until the light shifted. Miss Fairweather brought me water at some point and left it on the table without saying anything. My brother filed a formal petition 6 weeks later, concerned family member, petition for financial oversight, protection of estate assets. His attorney was polished and spoke the language of care very fluently. Miss Fairweather had called the meeting at her firm. When they walked in, there was a closed folder at every seat. She read the ethical provision clause aloud. She read it in a neutral, even tone, without emphasis, the way you read something that doesn't need any help landing. Then she opened her laptop. The first file was security camera footage from the church. It showed the reserved pew, the name cards on the cushions, the service beginning and the service ending. 3 hours of footage, the pew empty throughout. She opened a second file, screenshots, each one timestamped, pulled from my brother's social media account. 43 photos posted during the service. His face, his wife's face, the fire pit, the raised glasses, the new house. She opened a third file, a 7-year log that Laurel had kept on her own. Transfers I'd made to my brother over those years. 26 separate instances, $41,000 in total, each entry cross-referenced with a date, an amount, and the text message in which the request had been made. She'd screenshotted every one. "These are fabricated," my brother said. "We have the original message records subpoenaed from both carriers," Miss Fairweather said. "If this petition moves forward, all of this becomes part of the court filing. Court records are public." His attorney leaned over and spoke close to my brother's ear. The petition was withdrawn before the end of the day. The documentation entered the court registry before the withdrawal went through. That's how the process works, and Miss Fairweather knew it. Someone found it. The way things spread now, it didn't take long. The timestamps, the empty pew, the loan records. People in the community who had known my brother for years looked at those numbers and those photos and went quiet. A consulting arrangement he'd been developing ended without explanation. His wife's social calendar contracted. My mother called me repeatedly that week, her voice cycling through stages. Concern, then pressure, then something that sounded almost like panic. I didn't call back. What I did instead was call Mr. Kellner and ask him to walk me through the process of establishing a fund. I'd been thinking about families like mine, the ones who come home to find the lunch thermos still on the counter, who don't know what to do with a baseball cap, who have no settlement, no attorney, no one navigating the aftermath with them. Just the bill from the funeral home and an empty house. I named it the Sulphur Springs Fund for the intersection. It started small, enough to cover burial costs for a handful of families in the first year, families who had lost someone to an impaired or negligent driver. No press, no social media, no announcements. I didn't want to be a story. I wanted the work to outlast me. By the second year, we'd added a scholarship for kids who'd lost a parent. By the third, a counseling program. Henry's teacher sent a note after she heard about it, a handwritten card that said, "He would have been so proud of you." I folded it and slipped it behind his photograph on the mantle, the one where his cap is blown sideways and Laurel is laughing. A year after the fund launched, a letter arrived in a plain envelope, my brother's handwriting on the outside. I stood at the mailbox for a moment before I opened it. He didn't ask for anything. He said he replayed that Thursday more than I probably thought. He said the marriage was struggling. He said he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he wanted me to know he was sorry, and he meant it. I read it 3 times over 2 days. Then I wrote back, not much, 1 paragraph. "I forgive you, not because you earned it, you didn't, but because I'm not willing to carry this for the rest of my life. Don't mistake forgiveness for a door opening. It isn't. It's just me setting something down so I can walk lighter." I mailed it and didn't wait for a response and didn't need one. Henry's baseball cap is on a hook by the front door now. I moved it there about 8 months after the accident, when it finally felt like the right place for it, like he'd hung it there himself on the way in from school, one arm still swinging, already talking about whatever had happened that day. Laurel sat in a lawyer's office 4 years before she died and thought through every way the wrong people might try to take something from me. She planned for it quietly, without telling me, without making it a thing. She left me a letter that said I didn't have to fight anyone. That's the most honest thing I know about love. It's not who shares your name. It's not who shows up at Christmas and says the right things at the table. It's who shows up when there is nothing in it for them, and who quietly, without asking for credit, prepares for the moments you don't even know are coming yet. Some people will tell you who they are when it costs them nothing to look good. Others will show you when the cost is everything. I know now which ones deserve a seat at my table, and I know exactly which chairs to leave empty.